Imagine for a moment being accused of a crime you didn't commit. Now, imagine yourself under intense pressure, isolated, exhausted, and against all reason. You confess. You admit guilt for something you know, deep down, you never did. This isn't a plot from a fictional drama. It's a stark reality for many innocent individuals, leading to tragic miscarriages of justice. Today, we're going to explore the compelling and often unsettling psychology behind false confessions, delving into why someone who is innocent might admit to a crime. It's a complex issue, far removed from the simple idea that only the guilty confess, and understanding it is crucial for building a fairer justice system. False confessions are a significant flaw in our legal framework, frequently leading to wrongful convictions. The National Registry of Exonerations tells us that false confessions contributed to a staggering 13% of all exonerations, and an even higher 27% of murder exonerations. These aren't just numbers. They represent lives upended, years lost, and faith in justice shaken. To truly grasp this phenomenon, it helps to understand that not all false confessions are alike. Psychologists and legal experts categorize them into three main types, each driven by different underlying motivations and circumstances. First, we have voluntary false confessions. These occur without any direct pressure from law enforcement. You might wonder, why would anyone willingly confess to something they didn't do? The reasons can vary widely: a desire for notoriety, perhaps someone seeking attention or even infamy; delusional beliefs, where an individual genuinely but falsely believes they committed the crime; a need for self-punishment due to guilt over unrelated issues; or even an attempt to protect the true perpetrator, like a parent shielding a child. These cases, while impactful, are less common than those driven by interrogation pressures. Next, and far more prevalent, are coerced-compliant false confessions. Here, the suspect knows they are innocent, but they confess primarily to escape the immediate, highly stressful interrogation environment. Think about it: prolonged questioning, isolation, the feeling of being trapped. An individual might confess to avoid a perceived harsher punishment, or to secure a promised leniency, even if those promises are vague or misleading. They comply with the interrogator's demands, hoping to end the ordeal. The moment the pressure is removed, these confessions are typically and often quickly recanted. A stark historical example of the legal system grappling with confessions extorted by violence is the 1936 case of Brown versus Mississippi, which highlighted the extreme lengths to which coercion could go. The third type, and perhaps the most psychologically unsettling, is the coerced-internalized false confession, sometimes called a persuaded false confession. In these situations, intense and prolonged interrogation tactics can lead innocent suspects to genuinely doubt their own memory. They might become convinced they committed the crime, despite having no actual recollection of doing so. This can be exacerbated by what's known as memory distrust syndrome, where an individual's confidence in their own memory arose under sustained external pressure. It's a chilling reminder of how fragile our sense of reality can be when confronted with persistent authority. So, what are the key ingredients that can combine to create these false confessions? It's rarely one single factor, but rather a perfect storm of individual vulnerabilities colliding with specific interrogation tactics.
Certain demographics are particularly susceptible. Juveniles, for instance, are highly vulnerable due to their developmental stage. They might struggle to understand their rights, foresee long-term consequences, or withstand adult pressure. Individuals with intellectual disabilities or those with mental illnesses and psychiatric disorders are also at significantly higher risk. Beyond demographics, certain psychological traits play a role. High suggestibility, meaning a tendency to act on external suggestions; compliance, a tendency to go along with leading questions; low self-esteem, high anxiety, and low assertiveness can all contribute. Even temporary cognitive states like extreme stress, fatigue, sleep deprivation, or drug and alcohol withdrawal can impair judgment and heighten vulnerability. Now, let's turn to the interrogation tactics themselves, the techniques used by law enforcement that can, often unintentionally, elicit false confessions. One of the most significant factors is prolonged questioning and isolation. Extended interrogations, especially those exceeding 4 to 6 hours, drastically increase stress, mental exhaustion, and decrease the reliability of any confession. Isolation further intensifies psychological pressure, making a suspect feel increasingly helpless and alone. Then there's the controversial practice of deceptive practices. In many jurisdictions, law enforcement is permitted to lie about evidence during interrogations. They might fabricate DNA results, falsely claim eyewitness accounts, or even say a co-conspirator has already confessed, all to induce a confession. While legally permissible in many places, critics argue this is inherently coercive and significantly raises the risk of false confessions. Threats and promises, whether explicit or implied, are also powerful coercive tools. Imagine being told you'll face a harsher sentence if you don't confess, or being promised leniency, a lighter sentence, or that you can go home if you just admit guilt. These are potent incentives for an innocent person to falsely confess to escape an immediate, terrifying predicament. Interrogators also frequently use minimization and maximization. They might minimize the moral seriousness of the crime, making a confession seem like a less severe step, perhaps suggesting it was an accident or understandable under the circumstances. Conversely, they might maximize the perceived consequences of not confessing, portraying the situation as hopeless without a confession. A prominent and widely criticized interrogation method is the Reid Technique. This technique is guilt presumptive, meaning interrogators are taught to approach suspects with the assumption of guilt. It relies heavily on psychological manipulation, deception, and confrontational tactics. While proponents argue its effectiveness in solving crimes, researchers like Saul Kassan and Richard Leo have heavily criticized it for significantly increasing the risk of false confessions, particularly among vulnerable individuals. Understanding these factors isn't just an academic exercise. It's critical because the myth persists that innocent people simply don't confess. This widespread public perception, often dubbed the myth of psychological interrogation, means that judges and juries implicitly trust confessions, even when contradictory evidence exists. This bias contributes significantly to wrongful convictions. A confession is often seen as the gold standard of evidence, making it incredibly difficult for a jury to discount, even in the face of DNA evidence proving innocence. The ethical and legal status of many interrogation techniques, especially police deception, remains a major controversy. Critics argue that lying about evidence is not only unethical, but also fundamentally undermines the trustworthiness of any confession. The Reid Technique's confrontational approach is also under continuous scrutiny, with a growing call for less confrontational information-gathering methods, similar to those used successfully in many European countries.
So, what's the path forward? How can we reduce the occurrence of false confessions and protect the innocent? Thankfully, ongoing efforts and proposed reforms offer real hope. One of the most crucial advocacy points is mandatory electronic recording of interrogations. Recording the entire interrogation process from beginning to end enhances transparency, creates an objective record of what transpired, and helps to mitigate coercive tactics. Many states have already adopted such mandates, and it's a vital step. There's also a growing movement advocating for banning police deception, particularly when interrogating juveniles. If we want confessions to be truly voluntary and reliable, can they be obtained through lies? Allowing expert testimony on false confessions in court is another key strategy. Experts can educate juries about the psychological factors involved, helping them understand why an innocent person might confess, and thus counteract the common misconception. Some research suggests imposing time limits on interrogations, perhaps 4 hours for adults and 2 for juveniles, to reduce the mental exhaustion and stress that contribute to false confessions. And finally, promoting the adoption of non-confrontational interrogation methods focused on gathering accurate information rather than extracting a confession, represents a fundamental shift towards a more just and effective interrogation paradigm. The psychology of false confessions teaches us that the human mind under extreme pressure can be remarkably susceptible. It reminds us that justice is not just about catching the guilty, but also, and perhaps more importantly, about protecting the innocent. By understanding the vulnerabilities and the tactics that can lead to false confessions, we can advocate for necessary reforms, ensuring that our justice system truly serves its purpose, to find the truth fairly and ethically for everyone. Thank you for joining me on this important discussion.